Welcome back to Alien Chronicles. It's a tale where peace was an illusion, and truth became the deadliest weapon of all. This is humanity's ultimatum. No more words. The war begins now.
The corridors of the Aegis Accord summit were carved from alloy and arrogance, gleaming with diplomatic posturing, but hollow in trust. Cerise Val was moving through them like a scalpel, sharp and certain, her strides slicing past aides and soldiers alike. Her expression was composed, but her mind was thrumming with urgency. She'd rehearsed the ultimatum in 6 languages, revised it in 3 more, and still, nothing prepared her for the stifling weight of the chamber doors as they opened before. Her got inside, the room was a cathedral of tension. On one end stood the human delegation, rigid in formal uniforms, eyes scanning the Ael'Kara representatives with practiced suspicion. On the other, the Ael'Kara, silver-skinned, tall, adorned in layered sashes of deep black and metallic blue. Their leader, Captain Kelth Ear, was standing motionless at the center, an immovable sculpture of dignity and disdain. He was watching Cerise with the steady calm of someone prepared to be hated. She was lifting the datapad with deliberate calm, projecting her voice without raising it, her tone a razor cloaked in velvet. "The Accord stands at a precipice," she was saying, her words threading through the silence like a wire drawn tight. "Our intelligence confirms increased fleet mobilizations along the Terran Ael'Karan threshold, in violation of Article 5. Kale was not blinking, not reacting. His reply came without delay, spoken as though prepared from the moment he entered the room. "We mobilize because your probes cross borders cloaked in shadow. Do not preach law while walking with daggers behind your cloak." Her lips pressed together, the moment weighing heavier than the words exchanged. "This is not a negotiation," she was saying, setting down the datapad like a stone placed at a grave. "You will stand down your fleets, or Earth will impose sanctions across every channel: diplomatic, economic, orbital." The silence that followed was not still. It vibrated. Kale's fingers curled against the edge of the table, not in anger, but as though gripping something unseen, perhaps restraint, perhaps memory. "You speak like peace was ever real," he was answering, each word slow, controlled, shaped like a blade kept sheathed only by discipline. "This summit is not dialogue. It is ceremony before the strike." Then the floor shook at first. It was a tremor, like the bowels of the station had sighed. Then light fractured. Glass screamed from the far windows, and the wall behind the human envoys bloomed into fire. Cerise was flying backward, somewhere in the smoke, her hearing gone, her chest racked with pain as the sound returned in pieces. Alarms, screaming. Boots on metal-a human envoy's body lay broken next to her, eyes wide and empty. She was crawling, breath catching on blood, her arm barely obeying as she pulled herself behind a collapsed support beam. The ceiling was bleeding sparks. Her ears were ringing like church bells struck too hard. From across the chaos, Kale was striding forward through smoke, not toward her, not yet, but toward his own guards who were drawing weapons. He was shouting orders, but none were aimed at Cerise. He was demanding medics, de-escalation, evacuation paths. She was watching him now, not in confusion, but in dawning clarity, until another shout tore through the smoke. He planted it. "A?" Voice screamed. A human marine young, terrified, pointing his rifle straight at Kale. He's the only one who could have done it. Cerise was trying to speak, but coughing blood. Kale had frozen, not out of guilt, but calculation. His eyes narrow. Ancient met hers as if asking, "Do you believe that?" The Marines were charging forward. The Ael'Kara were drawing plasma rifles in return, and then the summit died, not in explosion this time, but in the thunder of exchanged fire. War didn't begin with banners. It began in a room meant for peace, with the smoke still clinging to. Cerise Val's lungs and Kale, ears, hands stained with the truth no one believed. And as she was lifted half-conscious onto a stretcher, Cerise wasn't thinking of diplomacy or sanctions or treaties. She was thinking of the fire behind Kale's eyes, and wondering who had lit the storm that followed did not wait for signatures or statements. Within hours of the summit bombing, human battle cruisers were repositioning along the outer colonies, and Ael'Kara dreadnoughts were unshrouding across contested orbits. The news feeds called it retaliation. The politicians called it justified. Cerise Val, recovering in a burn-sealed med chamber orbiting Terra, was calling it madness over and over beneath her breath, until the word no longer meant anything. She was healing, but not resting. The bandages on her arms barely slowed the swipe of her hand across encrypted screens. Data flickered constantly in the dim light of her quarters. Surveillance logs, debrief transcripts, reconstruction models of the summit chamber. The blast had been too precise, detonated at a diplomatic arc, too fragile to be coincidence. And yet Kale had vanished. Reports named him a deserter, a fugitive, an enemy. But she had seen the way he ran toward danger, not away. She had seen his command not panic, not sabotage. She had seen enough war to know the difference between guilt and grief. The door to her chamber hissed open. A shadow stepped through, clad in gray armor not marked by rank, nation, or faction. "Myra Cha," Cerise was saying without looking up, her voice a bitter thread. "You're late." The woman stepped closer, her features lit by the blue flicker of Cerise's screens. Mira moved like someone used to silence, sharp, efficient, and dangerous in ways no diplomat could afford to be. "And you're still alive, against every prediction." Cerise turned, eyeing her. "You're not here for small talk." "No," Myra was replying, tossing a black drive onto the bed. "I'm here because someone wants you dead bad enough to make it look like Kale pulled the trigger. I don't believe it, but no one listens to ghosts like me." Cerise picked up the drive, slotting it into her tablet. Code burst across the screen, compressed files, audio packets, heat signatures. One caught her eye, a looped segment of human. Communication intercepts moments before the blast. Mira leaned in, pointing. "That? It's not Ael'Kara encryption. That's black-tier Terran military. Off-grid and dirty." Cerise's breath caught. "You're saying it came from us?" "I'm saying," Myra was answering, her tone dropping, "someone on our side wanted war. And they didn't care who. Died to get it." A silence spread between them, wider than space. Then Cerise stood, her injuries protesting with every motion, but her mind already ahead. "I want access to deep surveillance logs, off-world chatter, and intelligence scrubs from the outer moons." Mira raised a brow. "You want access, or you want me to steal it?" "I want truth," Cerise was replying, her voice not raising, but cutting cleaner than any weapon. "Whatever it takes." Myra nodded once. "Then we start with Station Helix. 3 weeks before the summit, that's where the intercepted chatter originated." And Cerise, the diplomat, turned, pausing. Myra's voice was different now, just slightly. "If you're right, if we're right, this isn't just treason. It's engineered genocide." Cerise was saying nothing, but her hand was closing into a fist far away on the scarred world of Runtel. Kale Ear was walking through ash. The city around him, once a shared colony between both peoples, was a skeletal grave of glass and heat. Buildings caved inward like folded cards. Civilians wept in alleys, while soldiers pushed back smoke with weapons that solved nothing. Kale had not ordered this, but he was leading Ith, was giving instructions to halt fire at evacuation zones, rerouting medships without telling command. His name had already been stripped from the high councils. He was being called reckless, insubordinate, dangerous. But he was remembering Sarisval's eyes, alive in the rubble, defiant in the face of death. He was remembering the summit, not as a collapse, but as a theft. Peace had been stolen, and Kale was done watching thieves run free back on Helix Station. Mira was breaking locks. Cerise was digging into the files of men she'd once shaken hands with. And behind layer after layer of buried logs, Myra froze. "Found it," she whispered. The room went still as Cerise leaned over her shoulder. A visual reconstruction was unfolding. A shadow councilroom, coded voices speaking in hushed authority. Necessary to force alignment. Peace weakens discipline. The Ael'Kara system is rich and underutilized. No loss too great if it secures expansion. Cerise's heart was pounding with something cold, ancient, and venomous. Mira's voice was flat now. They call themselves the Prometheans. They're not rogue. They're embedded. Military, intel, private contractors. And they're not done. Cerise was gripping the table, her knuckles white. The war wasn't an accident. It was a business plan, and somewhere, Kale Ear was bleeding for it. The tide had turned, but it wasn't blood alone that would stain the stars now. It was the truth. And who dared survive it? The command halls of the Promethean Forward Directive pulsed with manufactured calm. Polished floors, sterile lighting, and walls thick with secrets. Deep within, General Torin Mark stood before a panoramic display of tactical movements rendered like art. Red vectors pierced Ael'Kara in space. Civilian death counts were represented as variables. Efficiency ratios blinked beside casualty logs. He was watching worlds burn, as if watching Weather Series Val stood across from him. A ghost with skin still pink from healing grafts, her diplomatic insignia replaced by a simple black coat. Her badge of peace was gone. What she wore now was not status, it was purpose. The door had sealed behind her minutes ago, but neither had spoken. The silence between them was not tension. It was memory. "You always hated silence," Mark finally said, his voice smooth, untouched by remorse. "You'd fill the space with ideals, protocols, dreams." She was answering without blinking. "And you filled it with wars dressed as strategy sessions. You taught me how to speak so people would follow, even into fire. I just never thought you'd light it under them." First, his face didn't shift. That made it worse. "I taught you to survive," he said, turning toward her fully now. "The galaxy doesn't run on goodwill, Cerise. It runs on projection, on control. The Prometheans are not the enemy. We are the future." She was stepping forward, the heat in her chest boiling past fear. "You bombed the summit. You killed envoys. You nearly killed me. For profit. For control. You didn't just declare war, you manufactured it." "You're emotional," he replied, dismissing the accusation like a spilled glass. "We groomed you because you had clarity. Don't lose it now." She was shaking her head, the betrayal too deep to categorize. "I believed in peace because I believed in you." "And peace," he said, stepping closer now, "was always the cover." In that moment, Cerise understood he hadn't changed. He'd always been this. And she had been the weapon he carved from trust. Back across the void, on the fractured edge of the neutral moon of Selekar, Kale Ear was holding back fire with words no one wanted to hear. His platoon had been overtaken by Central Command 3. Hours ago, new directives issued, orders sharpened into blunt force. The ceasefire he'd brokered with human refugees on Selekar's surface was now officially classified as treason. But Kale was not retreating. He was walking alone through the outer trench lines, arms unarmed, toward a human civilian camp with Ael'Kara medpacks strapped to his back. The soldiers on both sides were shouting, weapons rising. The scene trembled on the edge of bloodshed. Then a single child, covered in ash, broke from the barricades, ran toward Kale. Clutching a broken breathing mask, he knelt, offered the child clean air. A moment passed, then another, and the weapons on both sides lowered. Not all, but enough. A stillness formed, one that did not last from orbit. A Promethean drone relayed the coordinates. The bomb struck 15. Minutes later, it tore through both Ael'Kara and human camps. It burned the ceasefire into Asheris. Still aboard the intel ship with Mira, watched the footage come in, saw Kale crawling from the fire, dragging bodies out with hands scorched and trembling. Then she saw herself on the ground. It wasn't her. The timestamp was false. She gasped. They edited me into the site. They're going to make it look like I died. Why? Mira was tracing the data corruption, her face grim. Because they're consolidating the lie. They'll say you died in a rebel explosion. They'll martyr you, silence you, and launch the final stage without interference. Cerise turned slowly, voice hollow. Mark's final phase. It isn't just conquest. No, Myra replied. It's extinction. They're going to deploy a bioweapon strain Theta 9. It doesn't just kill. It rewrites ecosystems. Ael'Kara won't recover. A long breath stretched between them. Then Cerise stood, taller than before. We end this. They weren't diplomats anymore. They weren't spies. They were survivors armed with truth. Vengeance had never felt so righteous. The medbay lights above Cerise flickered like ghosts whispering warnings. Her body was heavy, weighted with sedatives and shrapnel. Pain, but her mind swam upward, desperate, urgent, clinging to the last memory before the fire. The ceasefire site, children screaming. Kale's face twisted in horror. Then, nothing now, a ceiling she didn't recognize. A hum too soft to be human technology. She turned her head with effort, her throat dry, limbs aching beneath medical scaffolds. Ael'Kara runes shimmered along the walls, not in warning, but in healing protocols. She was not in a human facility. She had been saved by the enemy. Kale was sitting in the corner. He was not in uniform. His hair was unbound, his armor replaced, with simple fabric stained with blood that didn't look like his. A deep cut crossed the side of his face, already beginning to scar. But he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at nothing, still, silent, as if trying to hold himself together by sheer will. She spoke before she understood the words forming. You brought me here. He didn't flinch, but he was answering after a pause. There was nowhere else they wouldn't kill you for breathing. Her voice cracked, but it carried weight. You're branded a traitor. They'll hunt you. They already are, he said, his voice low, so I may as well do something worthy of it. Silence stretched, filled not with suspicion, but with something older, grief layered with recognition. They both had lost their homes in different ways. Now, all that remained was each other, and a war neither chose. Cerise pushed herself upright slowly, pain lancing through her side. We have to stop Mark. He's moving Theta 9 to high orbit. If it's released, Ael'Kara's biosphere dies. Within hours, no survivors, no resistance. Kale stood, his eyes now meeting hers. Then we stop it, together. They were no longer emissaries of peace. They were remnants of it on board, the Promethean's flagship, the Resolute Dawn General. Mark stood over the deployment console, flanked by high command officers and shadow operatives. Outside the viewing pane, Earth's fleet moved into strategic alignment. Ael'Kara defense grids were already cracking. The last phase had begun. ETA to biodeployment window? Mark asked calmly. 6 hours. Countdown initiated. He nodded. And the Val anomaly? Deceased. Confirmed lost in ceasefire detonation. Then we bury what's left? But Cerise was already aboard with Mara's help. She and Kale had infiltrated a cargo pod disguised as biomed supplies. Now, deep within the underdecks of the Promethean supercarrier, Mira guided them through service conduits with a quiet, professional fury. "Once we hit the mainframe core, I can override the weapon's launch algorithm," she said. "But it's firewalled behind biometric access." Mark's hand, his voice, his retina. Kale glanced at Cerise. "So we get close." Too close they moved like ghosts through the belly of the beast-evading sensor nodes, bypassing firewalls, disabling guards with stun charges and blade-quiet precision. Mira worked the system like she had once built it. Maybe she had but nothing. Could prepare them for what waited in the War Council chamber? Because it wasn't Mark who turned first. It was Myra. She stepped into the light of the Council's inner sanctum. The guards didn't raise weapons. The biometric scanner acknowledged her. The doors opened. Kale paused, his grip on the pulse blade tightening. Cerise narrowed her eyes. "Myra?" Mira turned slowly, her face calm, almost too calm. "It was never about loyalty," she said. "It was survival." Cerise was stepping forward. "You saved me. You exposed the Prometheans." "I exposed a piece," Mira replied, voice soft. "But I was in it before you ever suspected. We all were. I was there the day Mark recruited you. I just ... forgot to walk away." Kale's voice was like ground stone. "You planted the bomb." Myra nodded. Cerise's breath caught like a knife in her chest. "You killed them all. You tried to kill me." "I tried to end the war before it turned worse," Myra whispered. "But I was wrong. I saw what Mark's become. I stayed too long." Her voice broke now, the mask fracturing. "I can still stop this." And before Cerise could react, Mira drew her sidearm and fired not at them, but at the control panel. The security systems glitched. The alarms roared. Then she turned and sprinted into the council chamber, opening fire on guards as chaos erupted. "Mira, no!" Cerise called out, but it was too late. In the gunfire that followed, Mira died, taking 2 of the high command. With her, her blood marked the launch deck. Her silence echoed louder than betrayal. Cerise and Kale moved through the smoke past scorched glass and screaming klaxons toward the weapon core. They had no time. The countdown was still ticking outside. Mark launched from the flagship in an elite fighter, already escaping before the chain of failure reached him. But Cerise didn't care. She reached the core interface, eyes wide with focus. "I can disrupt the launch protocol. I need 30 seconds. Kale didn't speak. He threw himself into the reactor's control pit, pulling free the power conduits with bare hands. Even as the electricity tore into him, he was screaming now, arms seizing, breath faltering. But the countdown froze. System overready bioweapon disabled the war. Halted. Cerise crawled to him as lights dimmed. Kale was barely conscious, blood in his mouth, but breathing. She held his hand, and somewhere beyond the ruin, peace had taken its first real breath, not because of a treaty, but because 2 enemies chose to bleed together rather than conquer apart. Smoke still curled in the air like the last breath of a dying monster. The resolute dawn was crippled, its power grid dimmed, its hull fractured, corridors littered with debris, and the silence of halted war. Emergency strobes pulsed faintly across the command deck as Cerise staggered toward the final terminal, every muscle screaming, blood seeping from her temple. Kale's weight slung heavily over her shoulder. He was still alive, but barely. The electrical burns ran deep, his breathing ragged. Every step they took left ash and crimson in their wake. They reached the emergency control node. Mira's final override had locked the weapon, but Mark's retreat had triggered a secondary failsafe. Auto-destruct countdown. 10 minutes. No. Margin left. Cerise lowered Kale gently, brushing his hair back, her voice shaking as she spoke. "Stay awake. You promised we'd finish this together. Kale managed the smallest of nods. Then end it, fast. A sudden hiss drew her attention. Blast doors opened and General Torin Mark stepped through. Flanked by 2 black-armored enforcers, he was calm. Of course he was. His fighter had circled back, knowing Cerise would come here, hoping she'd still be alive. You don't understand the scope of what you're stopping, he said, stepping into the fractured chamber like a man walking through. A museum of broken ideas. This wasn't about war. This was about legacy, control, preservation. The Ael'Kara don't evolve. They stagnate. Earth needs room to thrive. Cerise stood slowly, her weapon trained on him, hands shaking not from fear, but from fury layered in grief. You murdered millions for room. You buried truth under empire. You used me. I made you, Mark replied, voice rising. I took you from politics and gave you power. Every word you spoke that swayed entire councils, I wrote that. Every treaty you upheld, I built the scaffolding. She was stepping closer. Then let me return the favor. The first shot hit Mark's shoulder clean, searing. The second caught his leg. He crumpled, howling, gun slipping from his hand. The enforcers raised their weapons, but Kale, bleeding, breathless, had already lifted his plasma sidearm and fired with mechanical precision. 2 clean blasts. 2 bodies down. Silence returned. This time permanent. Cerise knelt beside Mark, now gasping through the pain, reaching for a console override. You'll die here, he rasped. You think anyone will remember what you did? You think it changes anything? She looked at him, not with hate, not even anger anymore. Just pity. I don't care if they remember me, she said, standing. I care that they have the chance to remember anything at all. She turned back to Kale, helped him to his feet together. They limped to the emergency evac module. The countdown was at 3 minutes. The shuttle's core was barely operational. She rerouted power from the hull lights, bypassed life support redundancies. Kale was fading again. She held him upright. You're not dying, she said, fierce through clenched teeth. Not until I say so. He opened his eyes weakly, the faintest glimmer of a smirk breaking through. Diplomatic as always. The shuttle launched seconds before the resolute dawn ignited behind them, its final detonation, blooming across the stars like a wound being cauterized weeks later. The galaxy watched on the interstellar broadcast network. Cerise Val stood before a unified assembly of Terran and Ael'Kara leaders. She wore no insignia, no title, only her truth. The war was not sparked by ancient hatred, she said, voice unwavering. It was designed, engineered by those who saw peace as weakness. Those men are gone, but the scars they left behind are not. She paused. We will rebuild the worlds they tried to burn. We will rebuild trust, together. Behind her, Kale stood with a cane, one hand resting at his side, the other holding the ceremonial Ael'Kara signal, its light pulsing slowly, rhythmically. Stepped forward and pressed the signal against her chest. She, in turn, lifted her own etched with Earth's emblem and mirrored the gesture. No words were spoken. None were needed. The war had ended, but peace, real peace, would take more than ceasefires. It would take years of work. Forgiveness carved from pain. Unity built brick by brick across blood-stained ground. Still, for the first time in generations, there was hope. And 2 enemies turned allies, standing side by side beneath stars that had seen too much war, now dared to write something better.